We're glad you're here. If you're visiting for the very first time, I hope that you've been made to feel welcome. We're in this series called Road Trip. Many of you have taken road trips, and we've had pictures sent in. This is basically the doctor's note of why I'm not in service today. So if you've missed out on that opportunity, it's not just a photo op, it's also proof that you haven't completely abandoned us or abandoned your faith while you're at the beach. So if you have a trip to go and you haven't taken your banner, I think we still have a few left. We'd love to be able to stay connected with you the best we can. We're also taking a road trip here, and if you're new to church or new to the Bible, there is a lot of movement that happens in God's story, and people are moving from one place to the other, and it's a reminder to me that God is always at work. And there are seasons of our lives in which it seems that God is doing nothing, but He is always at work. We sang a few moments ago a song, and in one of the song lines that Amanda sang was, I've been around long enough to know that you're still in control. And I know that in my own heart, and I hope that you've experienced that as well, that even in those times when it feels like God is completely still, and you have even that eerie stillness when you don't even see the breath of God moving, know that He is at work, and He always has been. And throughout the story of God, we have Him moving, and we have Him moving people around, moving in people's lives, just a ton of movement. And throughout the road trip series, we're trying to get a better picture of what's going on. So we chronologically moved through some road trips. We began with Abraham. He took a road trip because God told him to take a road trip. Then we went to Joseph. Joseph took a road trip because he was forced to take a road trip. His owners, someone bought him. He was literally a slave and he was carried off. Moses took a road trip in order to lead God's people to freedom. Joseph took a road trip in order to lead God's people to the place that He had for them, the promised land. And David took a road trip to take the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, to set it up as a place where God's favor and blessing would be there, that God's light would shine from that place, that Jerusalem would be that special place for God's people, for His presence. And then last week we saw that Daniel took a road trip because he was forced to take a road trip into something called the exile. We look back on the Bible's history and we find these people being forced out. So up until this point, every road trip has either been commanded by God, it's been forced by circumstance, or it's an immediate upgrade for someone or some group of people. So it all makes sense. But today we're going to take a look at Nehemiah. And Nehemiah took a road trip not because God commanded him to take a road trip, not because he was forced to take a road trip, and it was definitely not an upgrade. Nehemiah took a road trip that was going to take him to a place that he knew was going to be more difficult, that he knew was going to be less certain, and that he knew would be a downgrade from where he was. So why does anybody take a road trip like that? That's like you and me getting together with our friends or family, whoever we are, and saying, we're going to take a road trip, and we're going to take a road trip to the smallest, most impoverished place in the entire state. And no one wants to go there. It's not a road trip. That's a mission trip, maybe, but it's not a road trip. But Nehemiah took a road trip that he knew would be less certain. He knew would be more dangerous. He knew would be less comfortable. He knew all of that. And yet he willingly took it. We're going to see his why in a moment, but I want us to understand who Nehemiah actually is. Nehemiah did not grow up in Israel and then he found himself in a different place. I don't know that he ever went to Israel prior to this road trip that he's going to take. And we know from the last few weeks, as you have been here, that we've seen the road trip where God's people are forced out in 722 BC. So 722 BC, they're forced out. They're overtaken. The northern part of the kingdom is overtaken, and many are taken off. But then we know for sure that not too long after that, in 587, we've got the southern kingdom being taken over. That's where Jerusalem was, where we looked at a couple of weeks ago. And it's completely destroyed. The city's burnt down. There's nothing left. And at least 10,000 people were taken out of Jerusalem and moved into exile. So they're moved hundreds and hundreds of miles away. So there's really nothing going on where God's people once called the promised land. Nothing, at least, people wanted to be a part of. So that's the time frame. But then in around 538 BC, you had people beginning to move back to start over again. But it wasn't going very well because they had no money, had no resources, had no leaders, and 10,000 or more people had been brought away 70 years earlier. And so there wasn't really a lot of strength. So God's people are struggling. And I know I've thrown out a couple of numbers, but just to give you a little bit of a grounding there, some of you know the Battle of Thermopylae had birthed the movie 300, which most of you men have seen. And that actually took place in 480 BC. That was a real thing. Not quite sure about the blood content or the "this is Sparta" thing, but the battle actually happened in 480. And for those of you who are too holy to even think about Hollywood on today, Esther was crowned in 479. So there's your holiness, stabilizing factor there. So Thermopylae 300 and 480. A year later, Queen Esther is actually put on the throne. And there's a book in the Bible called Esther. So we have that story. So that's the time period. But then you've got a man named Nehemiah. And this is when he's born, and this is when he's raised, and this is when he's placed in a position of power in Persia. And he becomes the cupbearer to the Persian king, which means he's a person of influence. He's a person of wealth. He's a person of importance. He's trusted by the king. He has some sort of relationship, if not even friendship, with the king. He definitely knows more than the common person. He doesn't have to worry about how much he's going to eat and what he's going to wear and where he's going to sleep. He is in a very, very sweet spot. And in 444 BC, 444 years before Christ, Nehemiah is in the palace. He's at work. And some people from Judah, where Jerusalem was, that kingdom, they are in town and they're at the palace. Nehemiah sees them. He recognizes where they're from. He doesn't know them, but he recognizes where they're from. And he says, how is the rebuild going? Like, how are things? Again, he never lived there, but that's his ancestry. That's his hope. That's his home. That is Nehemiah's story. That's his background. He's a Hebrew. He says, how is the rebuild going? And in Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 3, they said to me, those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates have been burned with fire. When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. The news hit Nehemiah hard. It was hard for him to grasp what was going on, and he got emotional and he struggled and he needed to step away and separate himself for a moment. Because although his life was completely comfortable, he had everything he needed, and there was no struggle where he was. His struggle was knowing that his people, the people of his ancestors, he struggled knowing that they were not okay. Things were okay with him, but things were not okay with them. And he had to step away and process it because he was feeling emotional and he was struggling through what was going on. And just like you and me, there are times when our heart goes out, we see something, we hear something, we get a little emotional, we get a little teary-eyed, and we have to step away because we don't want to make any decisions in those moments. Many of you have watched a commercial and you've seen an impoverished nation, you've seen impoverished kids, and they said, just call now or text this number to give, and you immediately grab for your phone because you're just feeling a certain way. Then you have to go, wait a minute, step back, what am I doing here? Like, I am just emotional and I'm responding here. And after some time, if it stays with you, you know it's more than just a feeling. It might be a burden. It might even be a calling. And you might do something about it, but you need that moment. And Nehemiah stepped away. He felt the burden, but he stepped away before he acted. Now today, as we look at Nehemiah, it is going to be an important, inspiring, and perhaps even life-changing moment for some of you. I know that because it hit me that way. Of all the people throughout God's story, Joshua and Nehemiah are the two that have made the greatest impact on my own life. If you were to strip away my Bible and say, I'm going to take it from you, you can only keep two stories, I would keep Joshua and Nehemiah. And they've stayed with me. I was interested in them when I heard them as a kid, and as an adult, I have gone back to them over and over and over again in character and leadership, and I love everything about them. So I know they can change a life. But there will be some of you that will not resonate with Nehemiah. He's just going to be a weird dude to you. And I mean this without trying to poke fun or try to embarrass in any kind of way, because we all have our struggles and we all have different sins that we struggle with more. Maybe it's lying or lust or laziness, whatever it is. We all have different things that tend to follow us around a little bit longer. But if yours is self-centeredness, selfishness, viewing life through how does it make me feel and how do I want to do this and how will I appreciate this and what about my future? If that is where you struggle, Nehemiah is going to be a difficult connection, because that's the area where Nehemiah did not seem to have any issue at all. His struggle was, what do I do about it? Because I cannot be happy knowing someone else is struggling. I can't be okay in my safety knowing that some people I love and care about are not okay. So he's about to take a road trip, not for him, but for them. He's good. His future is set up. His retirement plan, his job security, he's literally there to save the king's life. If the king has some wine that's been poisoned, he drinks it first to make sure he's okay. So he's in essence protecting the king at all times. Now, it could go terribly wrong on a given day, but for the most part, assuming no one gets to the king in that way, life is very good, and he's a trusted guy. But he said, I know I've got all of this stuff, and I am so blessed to be where I am, but I'm not okay knowing they're not okay. So after he took some time on his own, he fasted, he prayed, he said, God, what do I do? I'm burdened. He eventually told God that he wanted to go. He said, God, I want to go do something about this. I want to take a trip. This is not just an emotion. It's not even just a burden. This is a calling. And I want to go take a trip, and I want to do something about this. I want to help my people rebuild the walls to my city so that once again, they can shine. Once again, they can be the place that symbolizes the glory of God, the favor of God, the blessing of God. I want to be a part of that. But I can't enjoy all this money knowing they have nothing. I can't enjoy all this security knowing things are not okay with them. So he's taking a road trip for them, not for him. Now, lead people home is one of our 5 core values here. And it literally means to make a priority the act of leading people to Jesus. God talks about people being far away from him and needing to be reconciled, and that's that process. If you have not already figured it out, I hope you know that your great need is not to be good, it is to be brought home. Our issue is not badness, our issue is awayness. We are separated from God. We need to be brought home. Now, that sin is what divided, but now we have an issue of awayness. So your great need is not just to do better, to be a better person. Your need is to be brought home. That's the gospel message. So lead people home is what we're here to do, but leading people home is hard because it takes us being willing to say, I'm safe, I'm secure, but they're not. Therefore, I am going to take risks in order to get them home. And when you and I are a part of that, and that becomes our project that we are working on, it means we have to be honest about who we used to be. It means we have to be honest about where we are now. It means we have to be honest about, spiritually speaking, where our friends and family are. It means we have to be honest about why it took us so long to care enough to do something. There's a lot we have to process through and go through. There are costs involved in being a part of a project like leading people home. But Nehemiah said, it's worth it to me. I want to be able to protect them as a country so they can be that glory of God that they once were. And if you and I are going to build, we are going to be able to take some very important lessons from Nehemiah's building as well. So Nehemiah prayed, and he said in verse 11, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. Nehemiah's prayer was, God, I can't build this on my own. I don't even have the authority to just say, hey, I'm out. You don't quit the king. You don't just say, it's been great. It's been a good run. I'm just going to go into a small business situation for myself. I'm going to move on. I've drunk enough wine. I'm ready to head out. That's not how you do that. He needed the favor, the presence, the blessing of the king to be able to leave. And he needed the favor and the blessing of a man that didn't know his God. So his prayer was, God, I need you to work in the heart of this man who doesn't know you, doesn't care about you, knows very little about what's going on. I need his favor in order to get out of here. So he brought in the king's wine the following day, or a couple of days later at least. And the king literally said to him, what's wrong with your face? Which is what many of you ladies would like to say to the men around you. Like, what's wrong with your face? Like, what is the deal? And he literally said, are you sick or sad? And that is a question that I think a lot of us wonder when we look at each other, look in the mirror. Are you sick or sad? What is wrong with your face? And the king asked Nehemiah, and he responded in verse 4 of chapter 2 that it says, what is it you want? The king said. Then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my ancestors are buried so that I can rebuild it. He said, how can I not look sick or sad when the people that I care about are trying to rebuild something and it's not working out and they're living in ruins, and Jerusalem is a laughingstock of the world. And it is supposed to be a special place for my people and for my God. And how could I not look this way? So the king said, well, what do you want? He said, I want to go rebuild it. I want to leave you and all the goodness that you've given me, and I want to go be a part of this rebuild. And to Nehemiah's surprise, and to respond to a ridiculous request, the king just said, okay, what do you need? What do you need for your trip? What do you need? Do you need stuff? Do you need money? Do you need letters of recommendation, letters of protection as you pass through different territories? What do you need from me? And I don't know how long it took Nehemiah to pick his chin up off the floor, but just to say, okay, well, here's what I'll need. Those letters will be great. And he began to prepare the road trip. Well, we're going to look at what he really packed up for the trip. And there are two things that I want to share with you. Packing for a road trip is never easy, but thankfully, Nehemiah is a man. So he packed 6 boxer briefs, 6 T-shirts, and 1 pair of jeans, because jeans, that's all he took. And we know that, at least about him. But he packed 2 things that are more inside than out. And I want to bring these up to you. And if you are willing to be a part of building something not for you, but for someone else, of leading someone else home, of helping build them a home. And I don't mean a spiritual or a physical home. I mean building them a place where they're sheltered in God's favor and blessing. If you're going to be a part of that, you'll need these 2 things as well. And the first is courage. Number 1 is courage. And ironically, yesterday, as we were sitting down to eat supper, The Wizard of Oz was on. But anyway, courage. Nehemiah knew he would face opposition. Part of the opposition would come from the people that he was actually going to help. And this is a tough lesson. It was a tough lesson for him, and it's a tough lesson for us too. Because when we know we're able to lead people to something better than what they have now, to offer them an upgrade, if you will, it's almost assumed that they will be grateful and thankful, that they'll be appreciative, that they'll take it. They'll say, where have you been all my life? Thank you so much for helping me. We assume that, but we also know in the back of our minds what's been told over and over. Hurt people hurt people. Broken people break things. And when you are willing to get close to people who are hurting and who are broken, you're going to get hurt. You're going to get cut. Your emotions, your feelings, you're going to experience heartbreak. You're going to have disappointment. It doesn't always come the way we want it to come. It's not always responded with, thank you so much. I've needed that. A lot of times it's, well, who are you? Who do you think you are? You think you're better than me? Why would you ask that? Or, yeah, that'll be fine. If everyone that told me this week, see you Sunday, came today, let's just say that we would have had 6 services today. But, we don't know what to say, so we just say stuff we don't mean. And so, I'll lie to you. I'll talk about you. Yeah, I'll make fun of you. We have all those things that we experience, and Nehemiah went through it too. He comes back, well, look who's here. All the way from the Persian palace. Mister, what's your name? Nehemiah. Oh, you've come to help. We've already tried this. We've tried to rebuild. We've been trying for almost 100 years. It hasn't worked out. Who are you to come back and all the stuff, all the junk? And sometimes the people that are closest to you, that you are willing to stop and say, I've got to do something about this, they will be the most difficult to get close to. And most of the time, we'd rather knock on the door of a stranger and talk about something that's significant than someone that we actually know and care about, because we know it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt more. But he would also face opposition from those who were threatened. We find in chapter 4, verse 1, when Sanballat heard we were rebuilding the wall, he was an official nearby. He became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews, and in the presence of his associates and the army of Samaria, he said, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are?" Tobiah the Ammonite, who was at his side, said, "What are they building? Even a fox climbing on it would break down their wall of stones." Now, their attack was not based on fact. It was based on fear. Nehemiah's opponents were afraid that if God's people ever really got together and rebuilt and fortified their city, they would become stronger than they could handle. And they would no longer be able to push them around and hold them under the thumb. It wasn't going to happen. So they're fearful, and they don't know what to do other than to attack. And if you haven't figured this out already, our enemy, Satan himself, is called the deceiver. He's the father of lies. And he cannot hurt you, but he will lie to you, and he will mess with your head, and he'll mess with your perspective, and he'll try to get you to see yourself in a different way that God sees you. And if he can lie to you, he knows you're going to begin to doubt yourself. And when you begin to doubt yourself, it's just kind of over. I spend a lot of time with my kids and coaching at times and helping them through stuff. And when you look into the eyes of someone who doesn't believe in himself anymore, you know it's done. Something's got to happen. Something's got to change. You got to pull them out for a little bit. We're going to have to sit back. When you don't believe in yourself, you simply cannot win, whatever it is that you're going through. And the enemy knows that. And some of you are not living anywhere close to your potential because the enemy has lied to you and you've stopped believing in yourself. You say, well, we're not supposed to believe in ourselves. It's all God working through you. So stop all the, he said, you know what I mean? God working through you. Because even God believes in you. He chose you and said, follow me. You'll be a fisher of men. We'll change the world here. You can do this. The enemy knows that. And if he can get you to doubt yourself, he's already won half the battle. So he tried to make Nehemiah and his people doubt. But in chapter 4, verse 9, it says, "But we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet this threat." Then down in verse 16, "From that day on, half of my men did the work, while the other half were equipped with spears, shields, bows, and armor. Those who carried materials did their work with one hand and held a weapon in the other. And each of the builders wore his sword at his side as he worked." I love that visual of work, stab, work, stab. It's kind of like you got my tool in one hand, I'm working, but I'm also ready to fight. He said, we're not going to stop. We're not going to abandon the mission. We'll change our method maybe, but we're not going to abandon the mission here. We're going to continue to work. The second thing we're going to see here is obvious, I think. It's just resolve. Like just the willingness to stay, the willingness to continue, the willingness to press on, to say, I don't care what obstacles I'm facing, I'm not giving up on this. I'm going to see this thing till the very end. And when you and I enter into a season of building and of trying to have this project come to life, of seeing lives change and seeing people brought home, there will be moments where you'll want to bail and you'll want to walk and you'll want to say, well, I'm done. I'm washing my hands of him. I'm finished with her. I can't do this anymore. But Nehemiah said, we continued on. Because if the enemy can't stop you with doubt, he will slow you with a distraction. And if you're not focused and committed, if you don't have resolve, you're going to walk out. So the distraction came in chapter 6. 4 different times, they sent an invitation to Nehemiah to have coffee. His opposition said, hey, let's just talk. Let's get to know each other. And if you and I were living during that time and we had been Nehemiah, we probably would have had people say, hey, what would hurt, man? Keep your enemies closer, or whatever the saying is. Let's stay close. Let's keep that relationship. Perhaps there will be something there. Maybe they'll get to know you and they'll back off a little bit. Maybe you'll find out something, a key. But instead, Nehemiah saw it for what it was. And in verse 3, it says, but they were scheming to harm me. So I sent messengers to them with this reply. And I love this verse. I've underlined it. It's highlighted. I've screenshotted it. It's on my phone. I love this verse. I am carrying on a great project and cannot go down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and go down to you? 4 times they sent me the same message, and each time I gave them the same answer. I am doing something great, and I cannot come down. And you need to get used to saying that. If you don't talk to the enemy, you're missing out. Every time I'm confronted with an invitation to be distracted, whether it's a temptation, whatever it is, I continually talk to the enemy. I don't know what else to do other than to turn to him and say no. And I don't mean the whole not today Satan, but it's kind of similar. But I just look and say, hey, God's doing something in me. I don't have time for this. God's doing something big. I don't have time for this. I have to recognize the distraction for what it is. And you need to get in the habit of saying, God is doing something in me. I don't have time for this. You look at your phone and go, look, God's doing something. I don't have time for this. You read the email, the criticism, whatever it is. God's doing something. I don't have time for this. Someone confronting you about something that's just so trivial. Listen, God's doing something in me. I don't have time for this. Satan trying to tempt you with stuff. Look, I don't have time for this. Now, you can't use it all the time. When your child says, will you help me tie my shoe, Daddy? Like, you can't say, I'm doing a great thing for the Lord. I do not have time. Like, we get to the point where we want to use it all the time. It doesn't work that way, I don't think. But I think it's a phrase I think it's important for us to hold on to, and I think it's a weapon back against the enemy, to quote scripture to him, speak back to him. Well, it happened 4 different times. 4 times, obviously, he gave him the same answer. Eventually, Nehemiah heard from his own people. They said, there are people coming to kill you. No more invitations. Now you've got a warning. You've got a threat coming, and you need to do something about it. And in Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 11, we have another one of those powerful, powerful verses. In verse 11, Nehemiah's response was, should a man like me run away, or should someone like me go into the temple to save his life? I will not go. And if you're tempted, men, right now to go ahead and get an appointment with a tattoo parlor, I'm feeling you. Like that right there, I love that. And I know that the translations, they're close to Hebrew as possible, but I just can't help that some of these English cats said, there are going to be people like this guy named Chad and others down the road, they're going to cry over this one right here. Should a man like me go? I'm not going. So the letters are, men like me, we don't run. Like they just have it all over. Like I love, love, love that response. I have no idea what it sounds like in Hebrew, probably nothing like that, but I love that because it is a reminder of who's in control of this thing. So many times we relinquish control of our lives and our decisions to all these outside sources and forces that make no difference, eternally speaking. And God says, I'm giving you this day, I'm giving you this time, I'm giving you this assignment, and I am holding you responsible for how you come through. And Nehemiah said, I'm doing a great work for the Lord right now, and I can't come down. And you can come on at me because men like me, we don't run. We stay and we finish what we start because God finishes what he started. So if you are currently doing your best to build a bridge to help someone get from being far away from Jesus to coming home, and you're getting discouraged, I want to remind you, encourage you, and challenge you not to give up on people that God has not given up on yet. Don't give up on people that God has not finished with yet. It is hard. It is difficult to stay at it. It's difficult to pray the same prayer over and over. It's difficult to continually reach out and get the same response. But just imagine for a moment if God treated us that way. And at season of our lives when we were struggling to say yes to him, if God had said, well, you got a Bible, figure it out. I died for you. What more do you want me to do? Listen, I told you when you were 5 years old what John 3:16 was, what's your problem? That's not what God did. He continually pursued us over and over and over again, desiring that relationship with us. And that's our work. That's my work. That's why I do what I do, and that's why you do what you do. At the close of the first service, I had a college student stop me on the way out and say, hey, man, at the end of that service, I prayed that prayer, and I want to be baptized next week. I'm ready to follow Jesus. And you could have complained about all sorts of stuff. I sat under the air vent. Well, I couldn't get this. They were out of toilet paper. It didn't matter. Like, what mattered most was seeing someone come home. And that happened at least to one person today. And that's what matters most to me. Because one day I'm going to stand before the Lord. And if my response is, I made it, what do you think? Are you impressed, God? If that's going to be the response, I believe I'm going to be disappointed. Because I'm wondering if God will not say, what about the Jones? And what about the Andersons? Well, they're not here, but I'm here. But I put you in their neighborhood, and this was the purpose. That's why you lived near them. This is why your kid played with them on the team. This is why they were in the class together. This is why I allowed them to rear end you on Madison Street. That's why this happened. I was creating a connection and an opportunity. What were you thinking? Did you think I put you here to win awards and then die? Like, no, you're here to do a great work. You are my plan for redeeming the human race. You talking to him, and you talking to her, and you inviting them in to get to know me. Don't give up on people that God hasn't given up on. Don't give up on people God has not finished with yet. Nehemiah's first act was to pray, to begin spiritual battle, spiritual warfare. And so begin there if you're not already, but if you're in the midst of it, do not step back. Don't give up on them. But I also know that you can't lead people somewhere that you've never been. And if you are not a follower of Jesus, I'm going to remind you and encourage you with the same thing that I told those 147 kids this week. All we have to do is admit we need Jesus, believe in our heart that he's God's son, that he died for us and was raised from the dead, and then confess to him with our mouth that he is Lord, and we begin a relationship with him. And if you've never done that, then today is the day. And next week, we're going to offer baptism opportunities for people, and we have a few this morning who said, I want to be a part of that in the first service. And if you're there, if you need to take that step, we want to help you do that. If you're a new follower of Jesus, that is your next step. If you've been walking with him for a while and put it off, there's no shame in stepping up and saying, that happened to me 15 years ago. I just never followed through with that. Or maybe you're at a season of life where you're saying, okay, it happened to me as a kid, but a lot has gone on. And I feel like I'm a different person now, and God has done some things in me, and I just want, as a symbol that I've begun again, I want to experience that, then that's available as well. When I was in college, I went to the Holy Land with Christy. We were just boyfriend and girlfriend at the time. It wasn't just us two. Anyway, we were the group, and I had my roommate. Anyway, stepping in it. But anyway, we went to the Holy Land together, and while we were there, we got to the Jordan River where Jesus was baptized. And, you know, the pastor on the trip said, does anyone want to experience baptism here in the Jordan? And I looked at Christy. I was like, get your Bible out. Is there any reason why because I was saved when I was 7 years old. I know that was my moment, but I also know, like, for me, that was, let's begin again. And on that trip, I was baptized on that trip. I asked again, and then on that trip, I asked my wife to marry me, and that was the beginning of something special for us. Now, because I'm a dude, I could do that. I had jeans and no change of clothes. That was kind of easy. Again, packing is easy but that was fine. But that was a beginning for me, and maybe that's you too. But I want to encourage you to take advantage of that opportunity next week. But most importantly, if you've never come home, let's now be the time. So would you pray with me? Father, thank you for loving us, for the men and women in this room who are not followers of Jesus, who have never taken that step of faith. Let today be the day. Let this be their moment. Your word is very clear. It's with the heart we believe, and it's with the mouth we confess. And anyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. So God, I pray that you would break through any fear, any frustration, any distraction, anything going on in their heart or in their mind right now, and allow them to see clearly what it is that you're calling them to do, giving them the courage to take that step of faith. And for those who are in this place who need to step forward and need to give a symbol of their beginning again next week in baptism, give them the courage today to sign up. Give them the courage to speak with someone after the service. Give them the bravery to step out and say, this is what I need to do, and I don't care what anyone else thinks. God, empower us and encourage us as we seek to build bridges for other people, whether they're people that live in our homes or whether they're people that live across the street, people that work with us or work for us. In the end, nothing will matter if we don't lead them home. Thank you for the privilege of being a part of your plan, your mission plan for the human race. And may we be found faithful. We pray this in the power of the Holy Spirit, in the name of Jesus. Amen. Would you stand with me, please, now?